Welcome, everyone, to the third day of our Western Connecticut State UFO Conference. My name is Aurelio Muraca. I'm the Technology Program Coordinator here at the Danbury Library, and I welcome you to this special presentation by our longtime friend and conference, I would say co-founder as well, too, who dreamed all this up as well together with myself, Linda Zimmermann. So we're always happy to have her here. We're always, she's part of the family. We always love what she presents, what she brings to the table, and what can you say? 100 years of Connecticut UFOs, is going to be great. So I can't wait for tonight. If you can, folks, wait until the end of the presentation. We'll have some time for Q&A. So there will be time to actually ask questions for Linda. Just be sure to actually put those questions in the chat when you can. Now we'll relay them to her in a sort of moderator, type fashion. So Linda, you have the con. Welcome back.
Thank you. Always good to be here. And thank you, Aurelio. I can't imagine all your efforts putting together. It just used to be a few of us at the library, and now
I have her.
Whoop.
Oops.
Somebody needs to mute. There we go.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I'd better get started. Okay. So 100 years of Connecticut UFOs. We think of UFOs as a modern phenomena, and it isn't. And a lot of skeptics say, well, everything post World War II was the US government or some other government making these secret aircraft. So I always think it's important to set the precedent that before there was an Air Force, before there was really any kind of tenable aircraft, there were UFOs. So I'm going to concentrate tonight on the very early sightings and then do a deep dive into the wave of the 80s. So, am I not advancing here? Okay. There we go. Okay. All right. So just to let people know, I know a lot of people have books or are interested in them. I had written 3 books predominantly on the Hudson Valley and Western Connecticut. And I had a 4th book's worth of material. I said, this is getting ridiculous, because people would say, oh, which book has this story? And I didn't even remember. So I put them all together in this massive volume, big 8.5 by 11 hardcover, but it's a reference source. It says Hudson Valley UFOs, but a lot of what I'm going to be talking about tonight also happened in Western Connecticut. In fact, I always say that Route 84 from like Carmel to Danbury should be called the extraterrestrial highway, because that's where it was all happening for the most part in the 80s. One other book, Animal Reactions to UFOs. Every time I'd seem to, they'd talk about their dog or their cat or their cows or their horses. And so I realized animals are amazing witnesses. So there's that as well. And also I have a podcast, UFO Headquarters, wherever podcasts, every platform known to mankind probably has it. So if you're interested, you can get more of that. So let's jump in. This is October 22nd, 1906. Farmers and other residents of New Fairfield, Connecticut, a town 5 miles north of Danbury, were startled the other day by the appearance of a strange object in the air, which many thought was an airship. So they didn't see a basket hanging underneath like if it had been a balloon. And they mention, there was a noise like an automobile. And here's the kicker, it went through the air very swiftly and in shape resembled a big naval torpedo. It was near enough to be seen quite plainly. Okay. I'm going to show some slides about what aviation was like in 1909. So the Wright brothers only flew in December of 1903. 1906, there were not naval torpedo shaped craft that were flying swiftly through the air. It didn't exist. So what was going on in 1906? Here we go. Here's the state of aviation in 1909. Here's Orville Wright with Lieutenant Selfridge. And the Army had just bought, this is just a stick and fabric plane. If you've ever been to like the Air and Space Museum or a good aviation museum, you'll see these really dangerous craft. And they bought it for $35,000, the Army. That's about $1 million today. So there was an enormous amount of money to be made in aviation. We did not have Zeppelins. We had pathetic little balloons like this. You can see these guys walking on this metal structure here. Nobody had yet flown at night in 1909. So keep all that in mind. And when I say this plane was dangerous, in a test flight with Orville and this Lieutenant Selfridge, unfortunately, the airplane crashed. Orville Wright was injured and Lieutenant Selfridge was killed, the first powered flight fatality. So these were dangerous to fly around in broad daylight, and yet there were craft flying around at night with lights. Nobody had lights. We simply can't explain these. This was summer of 1908. I put an orange oval there where there were these, they called them mysterious airship sightings. And you can see there's one in Connecticut there. That was Bristol, Connecticut in July of 1908. A large airship sailing very high. Now I put in here the record. The Wright brothers had set the record in the end of 1908 of 360 feet. We often don't think about, we take altitude for granted. There was no craft that we had other than sending a balloon that, would go up and you couldn't maneuver, that could go very high. It passed over the eastern part of town. You can see it was maneuvering. It wasn't just floating, headed toward Waterbury. And it says it stopped over lake compounds, circled as if looking for a place to land. Very interesting. Headed north over Walcott Mountain. Maybe some of you know where these places are. And people ran up the mountain to see this craft because they thought for sure it has to land. And it said nothing could be learned of its identity. It just disappeared. So again, there just were no aircraft that could do that. Christmas Day, 1909, New Haven, Connecticut was a big sighting. Very high altitude. Again, just the next altitude record was just 492 feet. And this was a craft that was circling. And I loved the way the description and the newspapers said it was in maneuvers impossible for balloons and dirigibles. And you know the way they used to write, it was too large to be any feathered inhabitants of the globe. In other words, it wasn't a bird. So no one thought it was aliens. No one was scared. A lot of the criticism of this wave of mysterious airship sightings, they say it was mass hysteria. People were hysterical. No, they're saying this was a conquest of the air, a real spectacle. And the articles talked about the great achievements of mankind. No one thought it was Martians. They thought some enterprising individuals like the Wright brothers had made powered craft that could fly at night at great heights, carry lights. By December of 1909, I mapped where all of the mysterious airship sightings were in the area. They started in Connecticut, spread to the Hudson Valley, and then throughout New England and up into Canada. And actually, by 1910, they spread across Canada. So this was really an immense event in history. And nobody really pays much attention to it because they say, oh, people were just hysterical, misidentifying. Misidentifying what? We didn't have things that were flying around with these characteristics. I found this in APRO files from the winter of 1912 at the reservoir in West Haven, Connecticut. I love this. Charles Angus was ice skating with Beatrice Dettering and a couple of dozen additional witnesses, and they saw 5 blue-colored objects flying one behind another in a straight line formation from north to south, with a swooshing sound. I don't know if they have these anymore, but 4th of July pinwheels, you light them and they spin around and make a very distinctive sound. So again, 1912, we're a little later in aviation history, but 5 blue-colored objects with swooshing sounds, very, very unusual. So I think we're jumping ahead now, but I think we kind of established that the UFO phenomena in the Hudson Valley, definitely in Connecticut, was in full swing well over. We're looking at almost 120 years ago. And there are some other reports going back into the 1800s and even really some colonial ones in the 1600s. So not everything that was in the sky was secret government projects because we didn't have the technology. So we'll jump ahead to Ridgefield, Connecticut. We're going to build up to the wave of the 80s. This is 1975, and this witness saw 2 saucers with tapered peaked superstructure and opaque windows. So think of how close this witness was to notice the windows were opaque. The first saucer was about 60 feet in diameter, kind of aluminum brushed metal. The second saucer was a little smaller. I love these details. This one was kind of a copper colored. The witness saw these for about 15 minutes, and at the closest, it got within 100 yards and only 70 feet off the ground. Boy, I wish I was standing there seeing that. Phenomenal. And here's a very interesting point. We exchanged flashing lights. I actually did an entire podcast on people who have flashed flashlights or porch lights or car lights at UFOs, and they respond. There was one man, he spent his career in the FBI, no nonsense guy. He told me about flashing a light, 3 times at a UFO. It flashed 3 times back at him. Other people who would flash a light and the craft starts moving directly toward them. And they're like, uh-oh, I didn't want that. But yeah, very, very interesting. So if you have the nerve and you see a craft close and you have a light, try it because they will often respond. Here's a case from 76, the Danbury News-Times. I love this. Police were chasing something out of their reach last night. And it goes on to describe, and of course they have to say, mystery skylights baffle earthlings. Of course, heaven forbid you take it seriously. But it talks about, at the end of the article, all of these other people and police, dozens of them, who have been seeing things in the Danbury area. And this, I would love to find out. I've not been able to find out where Blueberry Mountain is in Winstead, Connecticut, because apparently there were a lot of sightings there. So if anybody knows where Blueberry Mountain is in Winstead, Connecticut, please let me know. So all throughout the 70s, again, there's a lot of activity by hundreds and hundreds of witnesses and the police. So keep this in mind, 1976, the Danbury police. This was a fascinating case from Yukon. And this woman said that she was out for a walk and she felt like something was behind her, turned around. This is the image she drew of a circular craft, silvery with red lights. I've gotten so many versions of this sketch of craft that looked like this. And whereas the other case, the objects were 40 to 60 feet in diameter, she said it seemed to take up half the sky. That's how low and enormous it was. Hundreds of students witnessed it. This wasn't something zipping through the air. It was hanging over the campus for several hours. It was in the local newspaper. Local police were flooded. And again, I admit I'm a little jealous. You're witnessing something for hours. What an extraordinary event. So we're building up to the wave of the 80s with some incredible sightings. This is a case in Enfield, Connecticut, with a former councilman, Paul Boucher. He's driving on Elm Street to Washington Road. And sometimes a sighting is more than a sighting. So here's this guy just driving along. He sees something. And then he said, the next thing I remember, my foot was on the brake and I was looking at a monstrosity of a disc hovering just a few hundred feet above the car. It had 300 basketball-sized lights. Just picture 300 basketballs and how much room that takes up. And these were the lights around this craft. And as it took off, he says, I was bawling. He's crying his eyes out. I was really shaken. And guess what? 20 minutes of missing time. And for a long time after that, he said he was very confused, eerie feeling it will happen again. I hear this all the time. People driving along and they see something, and then all of a sudden, I don't remember turning off my car or pulling over or getting out, and there's this missing time. So I think this is a case where something a lot more than just a sighting took place. But I love that description, a monstrosity of a disc. So a lot of times people will be telling me their story and I'm interviewing them, and you kind of get a sense that more than a sighting took place, whether you want to call it just missing time or an abduction or whatever. And suddenly they'll say, well, now that I'll say, did many missing time? You don't want to say, were you abducted? You need to go about this gently, let them, and you just say, what time did you expect to get home and what time did you get home? And then they'll say, now that you mention it, I was an hour late, or I don't know what happened to those 2 hours or those 20 minutes. So it's unnerving. And I have to hand it to this guy that in October of 82, in his position, he came out and said what happened. So we are moments away from the big wave. This was a little clip from if you haven't seen the Unsolved Mysteries episode from 1992 of the big Hudson Valley / Connecticut wave. They did a good job. The wave officially begins December 31st, 1982. Probably because it was the first of the mass sightings, which were to go on for at least 6-7 years. And so that night, New Year's Eve in 1982, a retired cop is he's actually out in his yard. He decides, since it's New Year's Eve and they just bought this new house, he's going to he's going to christen the house by smacking a bottle of champagne on the side of the house. And he goes in and tells his wife what he just did. And she's like, are you crazy? The kids are going to cut themselves on the broken glass. So he goes out to pick up the glass and he sees some lights and looks up, and there is a massive boomerang with three bright white lights and about 15 colored lights, only 500 feet altitude. Now, when you're seeing something the size of a football field about 500 feet above you, I mean, that's incredible. So there's a slight hum vibration, and I drew a arrow here about where he was. And right after that, over on Route 84, Ed Hansen was driving and he saw a huge boomerang. All these cars are pulled over. This is what happened all the time. Again, from this area to Danbury, cars would just stop on Route 84, which is not a safe thing to do, and get out and just stand in awe of these massive craft. It's making tight circles over the road. Massive craft should not be able to make tight circles. It was also beaming down a white light. And this is another eerie characteristic. He said he thought, I wish it would get closer. And as soon as he thought that, it did. Now, if you hear this once, you say it was a coincidence. I must have heard this 100 times when people would think, I wish it would come closer, and then it started moving. Well, be careful what you ask for, because it's heading straight for his car with that white beaming light. Suddenly, he's terrified. Now, here's this grown man. He's blowing the horn, screaming for this thing to go away. And he said there were thoughts that weren't my own. He kept hearing, don't be afraid, don't be afraid. This just happened all the time. Some sort of psychic connection with these craft. I just last week, it's amazing how witnesses still are coming forward. I had not spoken to anyone from that New Year's Eve sighting until a week ago. And it's wonderful. I gave a lecture and this woman came forward. She goes, there was a big sighting New Year's Eve of 1982. And I'm like, don't tell me. She goes, yeah, she watched what she called a pickle-shaped object. So imagine a boomerang kind of upside down or hanging there in it like a V shape. She and other people watched it for 30 minutes. Again, the characteristics of this wave of sightings, to kind of put them all together: massive, usually silent, maybe a slight hum, long-term sightings, not, oh, it shot across the sky, 20, 30 minutes. The craft so low, I'll tell you some of them where, people would say, if I had a rock, I could have hit it. If I had a tennis ball, I could have hit it. Treetop level. This was the most astonishing series of UFO sightings I feel very comfortable saying ever. I always compare it to the Phoenix Lights, which was in the 90s, was an astonishing night of sightings. I take nothing from, away from how amazing it was, but that was one night. And that was a typical night of the week in this area for the better part of the 80s. Okay, so then we go to February of 83, the next big sighting that started around Kent, New York, with Monique O'Driscoll. This is one of, the way in Close Encounters, the woman keeps sketching and resketching the Devil's Tower. She kept sketching this and drawing it. She just was obsessed to try to get it right. This is what she saw. And this is, in fact, Michael Schratt, who I know is going to be speaking later this week, put together this illustration. Monique was with her daughter. They saw this craft, followed it to White Pond, and she had to get out and see it. Their daughter is in the car screaming, "They're going to take us. Get back in the car." She is terrified. The craft finally slowly moves away, and it is next seen in Danbury, Connecticut. A teacher by the name of Herbert Proudfoot is traveling with 2 air traffic controllers. So people who know what's in the sky. And they and other witnesses called the police to say about this massive silent craft moving unbelievably slowly. So you remember those Danbury police who were chasing UFOs in 1976? Well, I guess they forgot because they told witnesses that stable people do not report UFOs. Okay, we'll see. We'll see about that. Another Danbury case in the fall of '83. This was a great description. Thomas Talarico and his son are driving along South King Street about 7 p.m. He and another car stop because over a field of Overlook Farm, and I don't know if Overlook Farm is still there, maybe someone can tell me. He was fascinated to see this 100-foot long silent disc. His son was not so fascinated. His son is trying to hide under the dashboard, screaming, "Dad, let's get out of here." His son, when I interviewed him, was then had become age 46. It wasn't until he was 46 years old that his son admitted that he saw this craft too. And when his father was going to come to one of our conferences at the Danbury Library, he said to his son, "Why don't you come along to tell your story?" And the guy said, "No way, no way." So here's the father just fascinated by this, what he thought, I guess, was just this beautiful, fascinating craft. And his son is really carrying a lifelong trauma because of it. So everybody reacts differently. I have people who say, "I can't wait to see another one." And then there are other people who are afraid to go out 40 years later. They're afraid to go outside because they're so terrified. Here's an IBM executive on March 24th of '83, which was a huge, estimated about 5,000 witnesses in Western Connecticut and Eastern New York that night. He said it was as big as larger than a 747. It's just hanging motionless. I liked this description, like it was tied to a string. Phenomenal, phenomenal sightings. All right, March 25th, 1984. Okay, someone muting? Okay, good. March 25th, 1984, there was a V-shape or boomerang, first seen 8:20 in Yorktown, New York. And by 9:30, it went from Kent, New York to Danbury. So many of these sightings started in Danbury area and headed east into New York or vice versa. The Danbury people called, lots and lots of people called, again, hundreds if not thousands of witnesses. And Danbury police told witnesses, "Okay, go sleep it off and the pink UFO will go away." And others were told they can't be UFOs because they don't exist. All right, so Danbury police are firmly entrenched. that people are drunk, are crazy, are hallucinating, and UFOs don't exist. Okay. Until July 12th, 1984, when Danbury police chief and 12 of his officers report seeing a UFO. Why, love when hardcore skeptics become witnesses. And Police Chief Machado was on Candlewood Lake in a boat, and a very close sighting responded to their lights. They turned off their lights, the craft dimmed their lights. And so the chief of the police department, who said UFOs do not exist, firmly stated, I saw something I can't explain, and I don't care what anybody says. So there were about 5,000 witnesses again the night of July 12th, 1984. There was also sightings in Bethel, and he turned, the spotlights on the side of the cars. He was out of his police car. He shined his spotlight on the UFO, and the UFO beamed a brilliant light down. He was standing with a crowd of people watching this, and then it took off. So again, these craft responded to lights being shined at them or on and off. So I think the Danbury police took a different tact after most of the police department, including the chief, had incredible sighting. So this is just some of the shapes of the triangular or boomerang shaped. Of course, there were also discs and cigar shaped and things that defy. Some people describe them looking as tinker toys put together. One man said it looked like a Norelco razor, with the 3 little rotating heads. So we call it the Hudson Valley boomerang or the triangles, but you name it, that it was, the shape, it was probably seen then. Including this is a very famous photo taken by a police officer in Waterbury, Connecticut, May 26, 1987. Certainly looks like a circular craft, perfectly circular craft with lights all around it. This is one of my sentimental favorite cases from Danbury, August of 1988. Man and his friend were working at the Burger King on Newtown Road, and they got off at 10 p.m. And across the street, they see this round circular craft. It's only hovering 30 feet above the ground, and they said it was the size of Burger King. So what are 2 young guys going to do when they see a UFO hovering there? They start throwing rocks at it, rocks and pieces of tar for the side of the road for a full half an hour. And this is amazing. They never heard the rocks hit the craft, even though it's only 30 feet away, and none of them fell back to the ground. What is going on there? Some sort of force field, I don't know. Something absorbing the rocks. But they kept trying. And he was very funny about it, saying they probably would have been abducted, but they were the only dumbasses to throw rocks at a UFO. That was part of the official report. And he said that when he later saw his mother that night, his mother saw the craft in the Davis and Geck parking lot. That is another place I'm trying to locate. Ken, if anybody knows where the Davis and Geck parking lot was in 1988. But the characteristics of these sightings, something 30 feet away and 2 young guys are hurling rocks at it, and you don't hear them hit and they don't fall back to the ground. That is very, very strange. Okay, so in 2016, when we were going to do one of our conferences, this woman posted something on the News Times website. It's a long thing. I'll highlight it. She says, you know, hate to burst bubbles to basically all you UFO people, but she's talking about her father and his friends owned ultralights, and they absolutely delighted in pulling off hoaxes. And she says they were all from coming out of Stormville. And yes, there were hoaxing pilots flying ultralights and Cessnas from Stormville or airport. And she said every sighting in the 80s was the result of these pilots flying in formation. I think you see by what I've just told you of what witnesses have seen, that's ridiculous. I've spoken to many people who said that they saw the big silent craft and then would usually say, and we saw the idiot pilots trying to pretend to be UFOs. So I decided before I said, no, it can't be an ultralight, I needed to go up in an ultralight. Doesn't look much better than a Wright Brothers flyer, does it? Looks very dangerous, and it is, but I absolutely loved it. But they're so noisy. The slightest breeze, they're bobbing around, and people, and they're illegal to fly at night. And, you know, we in the UFO community suspected that these pilots were somehow being tipped off because there would be an incredible sighting somewhere, and an hour later, either the Cessnas or the ultralights are flying right where the sighting took place, as if somebody had told them that, oh, you know, we need an excuse. We just had a sighting, and it was something I couldn't prove. I couldn't get any family members of the pilots or the pilots themselves to talk. They said they were sworn to secrecy. So rumors that the government was working with the Stormville flyers, possibly paying them. You know, I know it sounds like a crazy conspiracy. Until a couple of months ago, I spoke to a man who was a close family member. He of one of the Stormville flyers, and that this man told him many years ago that right after a major sighting, someone from the FAA would call him to tell the flyers to take off and what course to fly to provide a cover story. Just stunning. What is the FAA doing, telling these pilots where to go to create confusion? Why? What were they covering up? It's astonishing. And so I've been searching years for this proof. And then just 2 weeks ago, I had someone else tell me that they were very close with one of the pilots at Stormville. And he told her that the government, didn't say who in the government, would call the flyers to take off and go to a particular location to provide an excuse for the real sightings. So this is an enormous disgrace. What was our government doing? Thousands of people over the course of years are seeing these enormous, silent, low-flying craft, and they're trying to muddy the waters and have an excuse by saying, oh, it was only these planes flying in formation. It's just astonishing. I wish I could find the documents, the smoking gun documents to prove this. But I have little hope. But at least we finally got the information that yes, the hoaxers were being paid, or being told at the very least, if not being paid. So when I started my research years ago, I didn't expect to come up with abductions, you know, at all. I thought, well, that's what happens to Betty and Barney Hill in New Hampshire or Travis Walton in Arizona. And I came to find out there was an enormous amount in this area, particularly in the 80s. I could do an entire lecture. It was like the biggest chapter in my first book. But I just want to give you one example of a woman and her mother were driving from Cape Cod to Milford, Connecticut in 1979. It's a Sunday night, no traffic. They're expecting to get home about 9 p.m. Now, they didn't see anything, but they said they arrived home at midnight feeling dazed and like zombies. They can't account for 3 hours of missing time. So you don't have to see a big craft. You don't have to, think you're seeing ETs. Something happens to people at home, when they're driving on the road, when they're hiking in the woods. And you could say, well, you could try to explain this off, except this woman and her mother went on to have a few other intense sightings. Just in 1980, this woman is walking on Rogers Avenue, that along the harbor. This is during the day. Okay, this isn't a fuzzy nighttime sighting. There is a craft. She drew this rectangular craft. She said the size of 20 football fields with hundreds of white lights covering it, moving at about 3 miles per hour. They walked alongside of this for 10 minutes before it zipped off over the Long Island Sound. And she and her mother were to have another very close abduction type experience after that. So these things happen in families. They happen multi-generationally. They happen during big waves, like, we've seen in this area. Speaking of rectangular shaped craft, here's a great sketch I got from somebody from the early 80s, again in the Danbury area. A lot of people described what looked like girders or beams. I heard descriptions like it looked like the underside of a bridge, or like I'd said, tinker toys. Just to let you know, I am very interested in rectangular shaped craft. They are very rare. They're only like 2-3% of all sightings and seem to be more recent. So if people have, rectangular sightings, I'd certainly love to hear about them. So let's go a little more modern, towards the end here. Simsbury, Connecticut, just in 2018. Woman gets up at 6 a.m. Her husband's already gone off to work. She goes into the bathroom. She's going to get ready for the day, get her kids up. And suddenly there's a bright light beaming in her bathroom window. Now, they lived on 7 acres. It wasn't like there were close neighbors. So she looks out the window. There is this rectangular craft covered in red and white lights. And she said it was a little smaller than a football field, but it was so close out her bathroom window, she could have hit it with a tennis ball. And she ducks down below the window, doesn't want to be seen by this craft. Too late. But she's a very interesting woman. She always said, by the book. She does what's right. She's a woman of routine. So she said it was right to call the police and report it. Nobody else had reported it. She couldn't believe it. She's like, all right, I don't know what it was, but I reported it. It's done with. Except it wasn't. For many weeks after, she had terrible, what she described as abduction dreams. Being taken, this craft, was it just trauma and she was just having nightmares? She developed a real intense anxiety and nervousness, which are all signs of something more than just a sighting took place. So that faded, fortunately, and last I spoke to her, nothing else had happened. But these are not things of just the 80s. This is, 2018, not all that long ago. I just want to mention this quickly. I go into this in depth in the book. In September of 1960, in Hartford and Woodbridge, metallic material fell from the sky. This is a brilliant man by the name of Townsend Brown, who thought he could use electricity to make, you see, he's holding this little saucer here. He thought he could create anti-gravity. And maybe he thought that it was possible because he helped analyze these metallic samples, and barium and strontium in amazingly high percentages. In other words, not anything really normal that we use. The results were startling and indisputable. And he said this material caused a weight change induced merely by contact or close proximity. Now, there's a lot of reasons why, a sample can decay and lose mass. But whatever this was, picture it, this metallic object sitting in a beaker in a laboratory. It was causing objects around it to lose weight. The weight was going down. Startling. That's where this was a Project Blue Book file. There was supposed to be a final report. I couldn't find any more on it. I'm sure it's tucked away in some government archive. But I just wanted, since we're talking about amazing Connecticut cases, like I said, it's in my book. It's a Blue Book file. You can find out more. Weird stuff has been going on in Connecticut for a long time. And the last thing I want to talk about, kind of summing this up, the wave of the 80s. Mother and two kids are driving on 84 from Waterbury to Danbury a Sunday night. Again, cars are stopped all along on 84. People are getting out to look. The craft was so huge, they couldn't see the sky. They drove to the next exit, Sandy Hook, the Blue Colony Diner parking lot. Blue Colony Diner still there. All these people are standing in the parking lot. And I loved the one daughter's comment. I don't recall seeing the sky, only metal and lights. And the mother got terrified and they left. But we're not talking about these little lights moving around in the sky. We're talking about people standing in a parking lot, looking up, and these craft are so enormous and low. All you can see is metal and lights. I'm covered in goosebumps every time I think of that. So that is what was going on in the 80s in this area. Just astonishing. So I have a Facebook page, Hudson Valley UFOs. You can get in touch with me there. And again, my podcast. And Aurelio, again, thank you for the opportunity to highlight some cases, which you can see I'm rather passionate about. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, we do have one from Carl. Do you think we're on the cusp of a government revelation due to imminent necessity?
It certainly seems to be headed that way. I never thought I would live to see the videos they've disclosed, the recent hearing. Somebody behind the scenes is pushing for this information to come out.
Also, there is one from John. He said his son saw one in Florida. He gives his email address. Maybe you want to reach out.
Okay, if you can forward, if I can give you my email is Linda Zim, LINDAZIM @optonline.net. So if anybody wants to email me with their sightings or information.
Also, can you recommend so-called sci-fi that's actually very close to current reality?
Sci-fi close to reality. I still go back to the day the earth stood still. I mean, I really think they knew something when they made that, guess what? There's craft that could land and probably neutralize us in a heartbeat. And maybe we'd better get our act together. So if not technology wise, certainly, I think message wise, that's still oldie but goodie.
For me, I would think the Close Encounters of the Third Kind is
Yes.
still the the go-to movie, which we're showing here at the Danbury Library in the Farioli room this Thursday. So if you want to come by and hang out, have some popcorn, check out Close Encounters of the Third Kind, you're more than welcome to registering for that event. Just go to danburylibrary.org. You'll see for Thursday night, we will have a free showing of Close Encounters of the Third Kind in the Farioli room. So that would be a great thing, I would say, to check it out and have a conversation, especially since Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who wrote the book, the preeminent first book on the Hudson Valley sightings, Night's Siege, was the technical advisor for that film. And that term, Close Encounters of the First Kind, Second Kind, Third Kind, is from Dr. J. Allen Hynek himself. Let's see, what else, what other questions do we have? Is there anything about the area around 84 that you found in your research to possibly explain why there were so many sightings there?
I wish I knew. I know a lot of the sightings were in, if you know, the magnetite mines in where's that? Is that like Brewster area? There's a lot of unusual magnetic fields in this area, and I'm wondering if somehow they can utilize that. That's a best guess, but as we've seen, they've been here well over 100 years, so there could just be something about this area they've been visiting long before maybe we were even here.
Also, how many abductions took place in the area during the 80s?
Hundreds, easily hundreds. It seemed that anyone who had a very intense, close sighting, not just something distant, something, right over their head or 100 feet away, it was more than just a sighting. And I've never totaled them up, but it's a frightening number of
Was it
abductions.
anything unique to this, geographic area? Was there more in, like, say, New York than Connecticut?
No, I think it was more, it was evenly distributed. It had more to do with the closeness of the sighting and the whether somebody chased after it or signaled it or just was open to it. Not everybody, of course, was open to their experience, but it was more the closeness of the sighting than the actual geographic location.
Another question, one of your graphics, some of the craft looked like stealth fighters. Is it possible that they were being tested?
Yes, it's certainly possible, but I don't think the enormous ones hovering over the highway for half an hour, 20 minutes, were, and I know stealth aircraft several years ago were being tested over the Catskills. So they do test aircraft in this area. But the flight characteristics just don't match up for all of the sightings.
I think I remember from that great documentary on the Phoenix Lights by James Fox that one of the eyewitnesses was asked by a reporter the same question: is it a stealth fighter or a stealth bomber? And he replied, he's like, you can take all of the stealth bombers and put them on one tip of that wing, and it still wouldn't be,
Hmm.
it was that big. He's like, you could put one of all of our, entire fleet of stealth fighters and bombers on one wing, and it was still covering the night sky.
Yeah, many witnesses told me what they saw was the size of a football stadium or a baseball stadium. And again, the entire sky was metal and lights. That's not a stealth aircraft hovering silently over the Blue Colony Diner. But certainly aircraft is being tested in this area. That's for sure, but does not explain the majority of these sightings.
Are there any current UFO sightings in this area?
Yes, I get a steady stream of reports throughout the whole area. Unfortunately, as we were mentioning earlier, the Starlink astonishes a lot of people, and it's like, people, please, it's Starlink. But there are triangles being seen and discs and strange lights, and it's ongoing. Not of the intensity of the 80s, but it's still there.
Have you ever seen a UFO personally?
Yes, 79, I had a rather dramatic sighting, and then in 88, I saw one of the V-shaped. It was a perfect black V with enormous rounded white lights just silently gliding by. It was chilling. It was exhilarating. I tried following it, but it went over some woods. So that's part of the reason I do what I do, because I've seen them.
Was it there's a lot of accounts of people seeing these craft over water or hovering around bodies of water. Is that the case with a lot of your eyewitness accounts? And also, was that personally, did you see one near like say a lake?
Yes, the 79 one was Lake Tiarati in Harriman State Park. I've gotten so many accounts of people seeing things going into the water, coming out of the water. Many accounts of people seeing a craft hovering over the water and pulling water up out of the lake or river into it. I've had so many people whose pools were drained. There's a UFO and it takes all the water out of the pool. And yes, pools can get holes, but the next day they fill the pool back up and there's no hole. And so there's a lot of interaction, especially in this area with all the reservoirs and lakes. The police chief, Danbury police chief, was on Candlewood Lake when he had his sighting. So a lot of sightings in that area. So yes, there is a very deep connection between UFOs and water.
Do you have it? Have you heard of any accounts from other countries, Europe, Asia, Middle East?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I did an entire podcast of UFOs draining water from water towers, from hotel pools, from lakes all around the world. It is an international phenomena.
Does anyone have any other questions? I know some of you have shared some personal accounts. I'm not gonna share those with Linda. Again, Linda, if you can share your email address once again for folks who may want to reach out with some of their accounts for you.
Sure. Linda Zim, LINDAZIM at optonline.net. That's OPTonline.net. And just, if you could say from the UFO conference. So I get a lot of reports and things. So I want to be sure to pull those out.
And also you can just, if you're on Facebook, just follow her page, Hudson Valley UFOs. I think if they would just also message you from there and just say, this is from the UFO conference that we just had this week, she'll put two and two together. And just any sort of eyewitness accounts, you're still taking eyewitness accounts from, especially during the 80s, if any of you have had encounters or sightings or anything with that. Linda's always very good at discreetly sharing those accounts in her books and talks, and making sure that your name is changed.
If
People start
absolutely.
counting you.
I won't rat out anyone. I'm only there for the information.
Oh, great question. Have you ever attended the UFO conference in Pine Bush?
Yes.
Linda's always talking about Pine Bush.
Every year for the last 10 years, I think, I'm always there giving a lecture. It's a great place to go. And the museum, have you been to the museum yet?
I haven't been to the museum.
Okay, UFO and Paranormal Museum in Pine Bush. Definitely recommend it.
Now, real quick, what's the phenomenon going on with Pine Bush? So they're getting sort of a lot of activity up there, right?
They are constantly, but their big wave was in the 90s, kind of when the Connecticut, Eastern New York was waning. It really picked up in Pine Bush, and hundreds of people would line the streets, the old farmers' fields, and any given night of the week, there would be activity. And a lot of the activity there would be in and out of the ground. Very unique.
Wow.
Yeah. So and you name the high strangeness, and it happens in Pine Bush. And it's still going on today. Triangles, boomerangs, discs, abductions. It's remarkable.
Wow. And is this around the vicinity of where communion took place, where Ridley Schreiber had his experience?
Yes, it is. Not far from the town of Accord, or Accord. I think they call it Accord. Not far at all. So basically the same neighborhood. What a surprise.
So everyone, we're at the end of our time with Linda. Again, thank you so much, Linda, for your gracious time and expertise with us for the Western Connecticut UFO Conference. It wouldn't exist without you.
Or you, Aurelio.
And I thank you so much. Be sure, everyone, to tune in tomorrow night. We have the great Peter Robbins, who worked with Bud Hopkins, with his presentation on alien abduction phenomena. So that is something to talk about, and to tune in to tomorrow, and you can ask questions during his presentation. And please, if you can, if you're in the Danbury area on Saturday, please drop in for the presentations by the Executive Director of Connecticut MUFON, Michael Panicello. That's the first presentation in the morning, starting at 10:30. And then afterwards, around 12, we have Mark D'Antonio of National MUFON, the chief photo and video analyst, talking about light years to Earth, his startling new presentation that is sure to raise some eyebrows and be enthralling for everyone. And there might be a special appearance by Tom Reed on that day, unless he's overbooked. So thank you once again, Linda, and thank you for everyone for being here tonight. And yes, we will have this recorded and uploaded to YouTube on Halloween night, so stay tuned for that. Once again, this is Aurelio Muraca from the Danbury Library. Thank you very much. Good night.